bachelor's in natural resources from Rutgers University in New Jersey. Came down to Texas to study beaches at A&M College Station in zoology. Finished her master's last August and will be continuing her work. I assume you're going to get your PhD in that. Great. And Amy's talk is, I heard Amy speak at the American Association Beach and Shore and Preservation Association meeting in Galveston last November, I believe, or October, November. Sargassum as a fertilizer for Panicum Amarum. Amy? Hang on. And I'd like to thank a new member of Team Sargassum, Dr. Scott Carr, for running the projector.
So one of the questions I get a lot is, how did I get here from New Jersey? And I started back in New Jersey. I was doing beach raking research, looking at arthropods in the rack line, and I got offered this position down here at Texas A&M. And when I got down here, I was told, it's going to be really, really hot, and there's a lot of sargassum. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. But I really didn't believe it till that first summer when I really saw it all on the beach and felt that heat. So it was quite different for me. So this is a new study for me, but I've been down here, like John said, for about 2 years now, studying this. Got my PhD. I had three chapters in my PhD, my master's. I'm going to go over my second chapter in there. When I presented America's Shore and Beach, I presented the first chapter. I have a few slides about my other chapters in here. If you have any questions later on, feel free to come up and ask me them later on. I have all that information, just not enough time to present it all here. So, all right, so I can skip over a lot of this stuff because obviously I wasn't thinking of how many people would be going before me and explaining all this. So just what is sargassum? What is the issue? We pretty much know all that. And where it might come from, though it might not come from the Sargasso Sea, we're not sure. So, what did I do? I looked at sargassum. My main studies were down in Galveston, so a lot of my research and the sargassum I collected came from Galveston. So Galveston Island's about 50 miles south or so of Houston. I'm not sure how many of you are here from Texas or out of state, but it is another barrier island, and it collects a lot of sargassum, just like the other pictures we've seen. And you can see here all the trash that's growing in there. And, that's not a good picture. Again, here just some more pictures, very similar to what you've seen before with the piles of sargassum in the front of the beach. And it is pushed up by tractors to be put in the back of the beach. And you can see it building up in those large stacks for the dunes here. It just kind of, there's such huge stacks of sargassum and mixed with sand, but not very stable. And they just kind of get put haphazardly wherever the tractors feel like putting them when they run out of room to push anymore because there's so much of it. So there are, of course, some advantages. It traps sand from wind. You can see here that this is sand that's trapped behind the sargassum. It also helps to somewhat build dunes. It can provide food for animals, and it can also provide some type of shelter or habitat for animals that might be sitting on top of it. So, some of the ideas that I used were that dunes are more stable with vegetation, and that sargassum may be a natural fertilizer for dune plants. So my hypothesis was that if I add sargassum to plants, that they'll grow more, and that if I add a greater amount of sargassum, the plants will grow even more. And then also, I had some comments made to me about rinsing off sargassum or leaving it in its natural state. I had some people who had been utilizing it in their gardens, and they said, if you don't rinse it off, there's too much seawater, too much residue on there, and it'll just destroy the plants. So I tested that by using sargassum that was either rinsed off or in the natural state. So what I had was 9 different treatments, and I had grown grown plants, grown Panicum Amarum, using the nodes. You just cut them off and you can grow them. So it's pretty much all asexually grown plants, so there's not too much genetic variation between them. They're all collected from the same area on the beach, so you can kind of think that they probably were somewhat asexually grown from an original plant somewhere along the line. I studied them for 15 weeks, and I measured the vegetation length changes. Well, I measured the vegetation lengths, and then I calculated the changes every 5 weeks. And I ended up using the data for the overall time because I didn't see any real differences, so I ended up just using the whole 15-week span. So I had a couple different... Can I move over here? If you can't hear me, let me know. I had a couple different treatments, 9 different treatments. Obviously, the top is none. It's my control treatment. And then... There you go.
That'll come off if you want to hold it.
I don't really want to hold it. But, so then I also had four of my treatments had a small amount of sargassum, and basically it's really hard to weigh it out completely, so I did it more by mass. Just grabbed a handful of it and put it onto my plants, and then I grabbed 2 handfuls and put it onto my plants. I did weigh it out, but not really. I have that data, but more is just by the mass. And so then I put the sargassum on top of my plants, and the top location was supposed to indicate if the sargassum naturally blew up the dunes or it was pushed up by waves, versus I mixed it in with the sand for half of my plants, and that's to indicate with the beach raking, you can see a lot of times that the sargassum gets mixed in with the sand. So that was kind of looking at how much the breaking, if that would matter, because it was a different method of putting it onto the plants. And so then again, as I already said, I would wash some of the sargassum, and I didn't wash some of it to indicate just looking at these comments I had gotten from people saying that, oh, it's going to be too much for the plants. But I thought they're dune plants. They're probably used to sand and salt and whatever's coming in from the ocean because it's a natural substitute. So for my greenhouse experiment, I calculated the average change of overall length for each treatment from July to November. And I looked at a 3-way NOVA test for my 8 treatments, and then I looked at all my treatments compared to my control to see if there was a difference. And basically, I found out that small versus large and washed versus unwashed had significant difference in the plants. I was only using 2 levels of the amounts, but the large did end up giving me more significant growth. And then when I left the sargassum unwashed in its natural state, it also had a more significant growth. The top versus the mixed locations didn't have any effects for the plant. And then you can also see right here the interactions, none of them were significant, so that means I wasn't having any confounding effects in this experiment. And here's just a graph of how much net change happened with all my plants, and you can see that there are 3 that were significantly different. All these over here are my small amount of sargassum, and all these are the large amounts. So the 3 that were significantly different all came from the large amount of sargassum. And so here are some visuals. This was my control study, my control plants, my 8 controls. And as I go through, you'll see a pretty obvious difference. These were all the small ones. And then these are all the ones that had a large amount. And the top left and the bottom 2 are both the ones that are significantly different from the controls. And you can see here that not only are these ones they're just bigger and greener, but they also have new sprouts coming out, so they're starting to asexually reproduce also. So then I wanted to know, why did this happen? What was so different about my washed and my unwashed sargassum treatments? And so I looked at nutrients, and this actually isn't from my master's, this is something I did the next summer. But I went into the lab and I started looking at the nutrients between washed and unwashed sargassum. And I went through and I reused new sargassum, but I did it in the same way as I treated the sargassum on my plants. So I washed it with the same water. But what I was wondering about was what is really coming from from the actual water, because it's in a college station, our water supposedly has a lot of sodium. So I also did a study of tap water, and I looked at the tap water itself, and then I looked at tap water once I ran it through the sargassum. I collected it underneath in little jars so that I could also analyze what nutrients were, not only what was in the sargassum, but what was getting washed out when I was rinsing it. So when I looked at when I looked at the water that was rinsed through, basically all my nutrients increased because it was obviously washing some of the nutrients out. So I had an increase in nitrogen, potassium, sodium, calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. And so this is looking at when I washed the sargassum, and you can see that on the gray is the unwashed sargassum, and that's what showed a significant difference in growth. So the unwashed sargassum had significantly more sodium, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and when you rinsed it out, you decrease the calcium. This is written kind of backwards, but it's written for when you actually, this is for the wash part. So I had a big increase in, it looks very small here on the scale for nitrogen, but it was a significant increase in nitrogen from the unwashed to the wash, and the sodium, and then the phosphorus. So in summary, I found out with this project that more sargassum did equal more growth. However, I only used two amounts of sargassum. So is there a threshold point where too much is just going to kind of hurt the plants? Will it plateau? Is taking all that amount of sargassum that you see on the beaches and putting it up near the dunes, is that going to smother the plants some way? And I don't have an answer for that yet. Also, top versus mixed in shows that there was no difference. So there probably isn't too much of a significant difference on the plants from when you do the natural accumulation of sargassum onto the plants versus when you have a raked process. And then the unwashed sargassum increased the growth, and this is because the unwashed sargassum had more nitrogen, sodium, and phosphorus. This is probably because the plants that I was testing on, the Panicum Amarum, they were probably adapted to sea spray, so they're used to sodium, whereas other plants, like in gardens, might not be used to sodium. And then nitrogen and phosphorus are probably the most limiting nutrients here. So my future research, I am now starting my PhD. I stayed on at Texas A&M with Dr. Fagan, and I'm going to be looking at more analysis of sargassum on plants, but I want to look at it at different plants, because right now I just looked at Panicum Amarum, and we don't really want monocultures all throughout our dunes, so I want to look at plants along the gradient of the dune lines. I know there's some of the backloading, so see how that affects plants that are more towards the back of the beach versus the shoreline. And also, I am hoping to look at some invasive species, because I've been asked before, what if sargassum increases salt cedar, and we don't really to increase our salt cedar on our dunes. So I'd like to look at some invasive species. I'm still trying to acquire them, though. So if anyone knows how to acquire invasive species to grow, let me know. And other research that I'm not planning to do, but I've talked to some people about, is that there's research on the garden variety of plants, so maybe we could use sargassum as a fertilizer. But right now, some of the beach management strategies that I proposed a bit to a policy committee I was on was to start moving the big, huge piles of sargassum, instead of putting it in just one big spot, maybe bi-weekly or monthly, taking it and moving it out along the dunes, so that it creates smaller, but still is a smaller dune line, but it's still on the beach. We're still keeping it in our ecosystem. Right now, that was what I came up with from this study. So the other studies that I've done is I did an elevation study on the changes of beaches over 1 year. I did not find a difference between changes in elevation between raked and unraked beaches. I took samples every 3 months, and I ended up, it looked like from my data that it didn't really matter every 3 months. So I'll be continuing for the next 3 years, every year, just for efficiency and time and money, every year going back out there and taking my data, and hopefully hopefully I get my PhD done in 4 years. Hopefully by that I'll have four or 5 years of data, and I will be able to present that again and maybe see a longer study with changes for that. And then I also did really rudimentary observations of bird species. I found 6 species. I mean, definitely not that 5,000 amount that Tony had found, but just looking at how these birds were using sargassum, and I just saw that some of the birds were in between the sargassum and the waterline. They really weren't using it too much. They were more just kind of standing there, but I still counted them. I saw a lot of birds were pecking at the fresh incoming sargassum, not so much the sargassum that was in piles and there for a long time, but more the fresh sargassum, where I guess maybe those invertebrates are still alive and still edible. And I also just saw them sitting on there. Also collected some flora and fauna collections in the piles of sargassum. Again, nothing compared to the other study that we just saw. This was just really kind of go out there one day and see what you can find in the sargassum. And I also joined the Sargassum Policy Committee, and that was a collaboration between a bunch of stakeholders in Galveston. It was an ad hoc committee to find out what should we do with the sargassum on our beaches, because as was already said once, it's probably not just going to get left in place, so we have to figure out what to do. And if we work together with a lot of different stakeholders, hopefully we can find something that somehow maybe pleases everyone. That's kind of a utopian world, but it's still better to communicate with other stakeholders that we have and to care about. And then this was just some of the data from my elevation study. My bird data, the flora and fauna data, and then this is pretty much, I've already said all that. Okay. I'd just like to acknowledge my advisor, Texas General Land Office, NOAA, a couple of my other committee members, and some of the people that helped me out with my studies. And I'll take questions now if you want me to. Yes.
What's the common name for Panicum amarum?
Bitter Panicum. Yes.
Is it bitter?
I've never eaten it. Yes.
Sargassum used in your study, was it fresh sargassum, like green sargassum used as fertilizer, or?
It was on the beach, so I went down and collected it. It was probably there overnight or so, but it was still moist and wet. It wasn't like dried up. It was like fresh right out of the sea. Yes.
So when you did it, the washing or rinsing with water, you used just tap water?
Mm-hmm.
And was that in a coastal lab or was that back at UNM?
It was back at College Station. So
I know typically on the coastal towns that I've experienced, the tap water is kind of foul.
it's kind of what?
But, you know, Hill Country up at A&M, they've got some good water up there. But I was wondering if maybe you thought about using deionized water for the rinsing. That way maybe you should see a more clear gradient.
That would be a good idea if I had thought about it with the original point when I was doing it.
Or maybe going back and trying that just to see if there was any variability in the tap water that you used at the rinsing, you know.
Yeah, I would like to do that. I'd have to see how much, I need the DO water to be, whatever water I'm rinsing it with, it needs to come out powerfully. It needs to come out really strong because there's so much stuff mixed in. So logistically, to get enough power to rinse off what I want to rinse off, it would have to come out of a pretty strong hose. So I have to logistically look that up. When I did my, when I re-rinsed the sargassum to run the nutrient analysis, I was able to, well, I considered running both of that, the running it through with the PO water and then regular water.
So it was it was more of a pressurized wash rather than, say, somebody was taking it into their kitchen sink and rinsing it in a colander.
Yeah, it was a garden hose. I mean, it wasn't anything too pressurized, but it was just a garden hose that had the typical pressure that would come out of a house. So, you know, if you put your finger over top, you can get it a little bit stronger and spray it. I might have, I don't know, with funding-wise, whether or not I'll be able to run more nutrient analysis. So right now my nutrient analysis is based on sargassum that has been washed with tap water. So when I redo my studies, I have to decide whether I want to still do it so it matches with my nutrient analysis. So that's going to be, I have had those comments about the DO water, so I'm going to have to take that into consideration. But really, I think the sargassum that hasn't been rinsed is what's going to work on the dune plants the best. But for garden varieties, I mean, I guess also another thing is if someone for a garden variety wants to wash their sargassum off, are they going to have DO water?
Yeah.
But for the nutrient analysis, it would be best probably to have DO water.
Thank you, Amy.
There's
Oh, one more go? All
questions.
right,
Yeah.
one more.
I got one of your studies that referred, you said that they weren't necessarily interacting with the older sargassum that's on the beach,
Mhm.
that they were picking at it or just sitting in between it,
Mhm.
but they were most active with the new sargassum coming up on a daily.
That's what I saw.
Was that an in-depth, I mean, was that, do you have a lot of in-depth study on that? Because that, I think, might make a big difference in what we're trying to study. It's not really feeding the birds and all of this. It's more as far as the new coming in daily. We're raking and mixing it with sand and just allowing it to feed on the new coming in every day. That could be a big help inside what we're trying to do. So I just want to kind of get your
It was very rudimentary. It was one day being out there on the beach and just taking 15-minute observations at 4 sites. So I would not draw conclusions based on that at all. I think there are some other people here who have done much more in-depth studies on birds that could answer your questions better.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks.